So you'll be able to see it later, and it'll be posted to the Alumni Relations YouTube page within about a week. So if anyone needs to drop off early, you can always find it there, and then we'll of course send it out to anyone that registers. So we will hear from William for about 15-20 minutes, and then we will open the floor for some Q&A. So be thinking about your questions along the way. Feel free to put them in the chat so you don't forget them. We will come back and be sure to follow up on anything that you put in there. So we'll let him have the floor for a bit, and then we'll have a robust Q&A if you've got some things to ask. So before we get started, I'm going to introduce Dr. William Crow, and of course LUAG, which we're here to talk about today as well. So since 1926, the Lehigh University Art Galleries, or LUAG, has been celebrating the power of art, and this year marks a very exciting milestone. It's their centennial. So we have a year-long exhibition this year with over 100 programs, and there's a lot to explore and learn about. So here to tell us more is Dr. William Crow, Director of LUAG and Professor of Practice in the Department of Art, Architecture, and Design. Prior to his appointment as director, he was the inaugural educator in charge of teaching and learning at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where he oversaw all educational programming for all ages. Crow has taught at New York University, the New School for Social Research, and Johns Hopkins University, where he was awarded the University Award for Excellence in Teaching. He holds a BA in Romance Languages and Art from Wake Forest, an MFA in Painting from Hunter College, an M.S.Ed in Museum Leadership from Bank Street University, and a Ph.D. in Cognitive Science from Columbia University. So please join me in welcoming Dr. William Crow.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Brittany, and it's really a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm going to try to share my screen so I can get things started. Let's see, do slideshow. Hopefully everyone can see that. I decided to go ahead and put my contact information right here on the first slide. I'll also have it at the end, just in case. I know this might be lunchtime for many people, or you have to step away. But I do want to say right off the bat, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you, and to be able to talk more about the art galleries and your connection with Lehigh. So maybe first things first, I'd love to just provide a little bit of a snapshot of LUAG today, in just a few slides, and then I'm going to backtrack and talk a little bit about our history. Since Stephanie mentioned, this is a big year for us. We're celebrating our centennial. And then at the end, I'll kind of circle back to what we're doing today and the impact that we're having. So first of all, LUAG is the free public art museum on Lehigh's campus. And that might seem really obvious, but honestly, for a lot of people, knowing that there is a museum that anyone can access on a university campus can be something new. There's so much that happens at a university. A lot of it is behind the scenes, behind locked doors and in research laboratories. And so we really feel like our role is a particularly important one as a gateway between the campus and the community, as a living laboratory for Lehigh students. So we are really fortunate to be the stewards of over 20,000 works of art, spanning over 5,000 years of human creativity. So everything from West African ceremonial sculpture that you see on the left, to contemporary Latin American photography, to paintings, drawings, printmaking, video art, really a broad spectrum, which is wonderful because we can teach across all subject areas and disciplines, and there's truly something for everyone. So where are we? A lot of people ask that when they come onto campus. The truth is, we're everywhere. We have works of art all over Lehigh's campuses, including outdoor sculpture, but our main spaces are located inside Zollner Art Center on the corner of campus on East Packer Avenue. While we're not affiliated with Zollner or part of Zollner, those are our two main exhibition spaces, and some of our staff offices are located there. We have galleries all over campus, 8 galleries, and actually 600 artworks on view in 32 buildings. So we really believe very strongly that art should be a part of the daily experience of everyone on Lehigh's campus. We have 56 outdoor sculptures, many of them from the mid-20th century, but really by diverse makers. We have even extended our reach beyond campus. During the pandemic, we decided that it was important to do outdoor exhibitions. And so we now have exhibitions along a 2 mile stretch of the South Bethlehem Greenway in partnership with the Southside Arts District. So you can get your steps in and your exercise and see reproductions of works of art, often paired with short videos created by Lehigh students to learn about the artworks. um, some 200 programs and events every year that are completely free and open to the public. Everything from art making activities, lectures, and symposia. Really, there's always something happening at the art galleries. And I should say, I am not alone in any of this work. We have just an incredible team of 9 full-time staff, 2 part-time staff, a just fantastic student team of 22 student staff and interns, and 15 advisory council members. And I'll say they are people who really are critical friends for us, who give us great feedback and guide our work. So going back, Lehigh's art galleries were formed almost 100 years ago in 1926. And some of you might recognize this space if you are in Linderman Library on the third floor in a space called Bayer Galleria. It is today where our friends and colleagues in special collections do their work. But it was originally one of the first spaces where Lehigh held art exhibitions. But in fact, to learn about the origin story of the art galleries, we really have to go even further back, really to the very beginnings of Lehigh. The founder, Asa Packer, there you see on the left, was a carpenter and a boat builder. So he really was a maker, and this idea of creating and innovating was something that clearly permeated the DNA of the university from the very beginning. And this was also amplified by Lehigh's first president, Henry Capet, that you see there on the right. And President Capet, he insisted on a curriculum that included drawing and also included painting. So this idea of a broad liberal arts education really was something at the very beginning of Lehigh's history. I'll also mention that museums were part of Lehigh's history in the late 19th century. Lehigh had a natural history museum located in Packer Hall. You see these two photographs of some taxidermied animals, including a black bear, and on the right, two crocodiles. So somewhat terrifying, but nonetheless educational in nature. And I think equally interesting, these are two photographs taken by Lehigh students who were taking a course in the still relatively new medium of photography in 1893. So this idea of object-based learning and also interdisciplinary learning was something that really permeated the 19th century. Um, I can't help myself since I'm an educator and a professor. I oversee the museum studies program at Lehigh, that I had to include this painting by Charles Wilson Peale, a self-portrait of him raising the curtain to his museum that was founded just down the road from us in Philadelphia. And you can see this painting in today the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And you can see in this painting that art, the palette there on the small table to his right, but also specimens from the natural world, fossils. There's the skeleton of a mastodon behind the curtain. This interdisciplinarity was something that was part of a progressive education in the late 19th century. So moving ahead into the early 1910s, we see an artist and an educator come onto the scene at Lehigh, Emil Gelhar, who was Swedish born. He's there with his dog in the right photograph, and he was trained as a landscape painter. And he was recruited to really teach freehand drawing at Lehigh. And he was later joined by someone named Garth Howland, who became the first official curator of exhibitions at Lehigh. But what I find really interesting is the first documented formal exhibition at Lehigh was actually curated by the Lehigh leadership at the time. Philip Palmer, who is the head of the College of Science and Arts, along with the university vice president, Nat Emery, and the librarian, Howard Leach, organized this exhibition in the faculty room of Alumni Memorial Hall. Um, this idea of museum-based learning that mixed art and the sciences and even engineering was something that Lehigh really explored in earnest. If you look at the minutes from the Board of Trustees meetings, which often took place at the headquarters of Bethlehem Steel in Lower Manhattan on Broadway, which is fascinating, they were considering, how might they expand object-based learning and inquiry-based learning, given the art galleries that were in Linderman and Alumni Memorial, but also objects that were feats of engineering and innovation. And so they explored creating a museum, auditorium, and library. You can see this rendering from 1928. It might be a little mysterious as to where this never realized building was to be located, but if you look very closely in the background, you can see the Tower of Packer Hall, now the Clayton University Center, and on the right, the Tower of Alumni Memorial Hall. So it was intended to be in what many people call the Sacred Grove area on the corner of Packer Avenue and Broadhead Avenue. But sadly, this building was never built. We all know what happened in 1929 when the world came to a standstill with the great crash of the stock market. But nonetheless, art exhibitions continued at Lehigh through the 1930s into the 1950s. And in fact, Lehigh is really part of a fascinating history of art and exhibitions. In fact, Lehigh borrowed great works of art from all the major museums in New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and two brand new museums at the time, the Whitney Museum of American Art and the Museum of Modern Art. And these were exhibitions that were organized by two relatively new organizations, the American Federation of Arts and the College Art Association. And the goal was really to travel great works of art to college campuses across the United States, partly to ensure that the arts remained present during the time of the Great Depression, but also because art was seen as a powerful democratizing force in a moment when we saw a rising tide of nationalism and authoritarianism in Europe. And so Lehigh is really a part of that legacy from the 1930s. Um, After Garth Howland stepped down as curator, an interesting person took the helm, Francis Quirk, who is on the left here. And he was truly a pioneer. He was a champion of photography. I said earlier that students were experimenting with this early medium. Lehigh was also seeing photography as a fine art medium, which really was still a pretty new idea, even though photography had been invented as early as the 1830s. Lehigh mounted exhibitions of photography, and so we see that here. In fact, Francis Quirk even embraced a completely new medium as well, the medium of broadcast television. And he hosted a weekly television show out of Channel 57 WGLV in Easton about art and museums. And so it's a great example of Lehigh being an innovator, and you can see Lehigh's banner placed there on the studio wall in the center of the background there. Um, Also on this topic of pioneering, Lehigh really spearheaded a number of exhibitions on North American art, contemporary North American art. And maybe at first that might not seem very innovative in the 1950s, but remember, even museums such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art only established their American wing as a curatorial department in the 1920s. So this is still a pretty new idea of looking at North American art in its own right. And in fact, this became an annual exhibition at Lehigh where they looked at contemporary North American painting and even invited the public who attended to vote on which works of art the university might consider acquiring for its collection. And so this whole idea of a crowd curated exhibition is not really a new idea. Lehigh was doing it in the 1950s. And so acquiring works of art became a big part of the art galleries at Lehigh in the 1950s and beyond. And I'll just share a few works. This work by Maurice Prendergast of the artist Edith King, who is an interesting person in her own right. She was the first woman to exhibit her art at the 1913 Armory exhibition in New York City. But Maurice Prendergast was part of the group known as the Eight or the Ashcan School. And we're really fortunate to have this gift from donor Ralph Wilson, class of 1922. He also donated this great American painting by Marsden Hartley. He declared himself the painter from Maine, although he spent much of his life painting in the Weimar Republic in Germany. But Lehigh is very fortunate to have this very large still life painting, Fruit and Basket, that clearly shows the influence of Cubism and modernism in Europe in the 1920s. In the United States, artists that were going to Europe and coming back, like John Marin, came back to cities that were rising in this industrial revolution with skyscrapers and activity. And we see this explosive watercolor by John Marin of the Woolworth Building in Lower Manhattan that was also donated by Ralph Wilson. But going further away from North America, we also are fortunate to have works like this one, a drawing by the great Mexican muralist Jose Clemente Orozco. It's an ink drawing on paper, and although it's small, it is just so filled with energy of these two interlocking figures that perhaps are fighting or engaged in some way. And also from China, the Baker collection of Chinese ceramics came to Lehigh in 1950, including this vase that's called a longevity vase. They were often given as presents to wish someone a long life and good health. They were often imperial gifts that people would give. And so we have this wonderful example from the 18th and 19th century in Lehigh's collection. Perhaps one of the most celebrated works of art that we have in Lehigh's collection is this painting by Pablo Picasso. We have five works by Picasso in Lehigh's collection, but this painting is particularly important. It is a portrait of his sister. Picasso had two sisters. One of them died very young of illness, but this is actually his sister, who was named Lola, Maria Dolores Ruiz Picasso. And apparently she was born right after an earthquake had happened in southern Spain and Malaga, where they grew up. And so that event, combined with the fact that she was a very inquisitive, curious, kind of troublemaker personality, her parents called her little earthquakes or terremonicas. So you can kind of see in her expression that maybe she is someone who was always kind of creating waves. Speaking of creating waves in the most positive sense, in the mid 1970s, someone comes to Lehigh who really forever transforms the art galleries. Ricardo Vieira joined the faculty in art, architecture, and design. He had graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design in printmaking and photography, and he would go on to be the director of the art galleries for 44 years. Ricardo was originally from Cuba via Miami, and he was passionate about Caribbean and Latin American art and also photography and printmaking. And so some of the acquisitions that came into the collection during that time were photographers like Bernice Abbott, a woman photographer who really pioneered methods in using photography to capture scientific phenomena, like this piece called Light Through Prism. I think it's just a perfect example of the synthesis of science and art in a place like Lehigh. Also printmaking, this great woodblock print from Japan by Kiyoshi Saito, Winter in Aizu, of this small figure moving through the snow, carrying branches and pieces of wood to their house in the snow. It's just a great example of woodblock printing, but also works from Cuba. Because Ricardo was an artist himself and forged many relationships with artists, he was able to secure quite a number of acquisitions directly from artists. This is a triptych, large-scale Polaroid work by the Cuban artist Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, who's a living artist. You might be familiar with her. She had a solo exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum just a few years ago, and in fact was one of the MacArthur Genius recipients just a couple of years ago. And also other works beyond Latin America that came into the collection from alumni, such as this gift from Haig Kunde by the great African American painter Jack Whitten. That might be a familiar name to you as well, because Jack Whitten was the subject of a major retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art just this past spring. He was an under-recognized abstract painter, and Lehigh is so fortunate to have this just massive painting that is on view right now in our lower gallery. It has its own gravitational pull. And Jack Whitten was someone who started his career training to become a medical doctor, but instead decided to move from Alabama to New York City and became an abstract painter as part of the New York School. Outdoor sculpture certainly cannot be missed at Lehigh. I mentioned 56 outdoor sculptures on campus, such as this piece by the American artist Marianne Unger called the Beehive Temple. Great gifts of sculpture that were donated by Philip and Muriel Berman, who were benefactors to the Lehigh Valley, but really to the entire region, known for giving sculpture and other works of art to our collection. And then more recently, building on our strong holdings of photography, our collection is just about half photographs. We've been very fortunate to receive some recent gifts from the political advisor and journalist George Stephanopoulos. He has given us almost 5,000 photographs, most of them political photographs, so that we can really see in many ways how democracy functions, like this great photograph by Danny Lyon of John Lewis in Nashville. So that is really a whirlwind history of the art galleries and some of our major works, but I want to say just a few words about where we are today. We revised our mission statement just a few years ago. So we focus on advancing critical thinking, cultural understanding, and well-being. So everything that we do is in support of those aims. So working with Lehigh students in object-based teaching and learning, hosting exhibitions where students can not only view, but do, where they can create works of art alongside artists, like this exhibition from 2019 of the artists Margaret and Christine Wertheim. We have a dedicated space where students can take the wheel and take over. So this is our LUAG lab, our student interdisciplinary project space where we host exhibitions every semester. We even have students helping us acquire works of art, maybe building on that tradition that started in the 1950s of the public voting on works of art. Every 2 years, students can register for a course where they do the research on works of art and artists and propose works for Lehigh's collection. Back in 2023, the students who were in this program selected this work by the Los Angeles-based artist Lauren Halsey. And that might be an artist who is familiar to you because that very same summer, Lauren Halsey was the featured artist on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we made a very fine choice in that spring of 2023. And in fact, too difficult to see here, but the piece that Lehigh owns was actually the study for a small section of the piece that was on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum. So we also engage with faculty. You know, there are many people on Lehigh's campus who are engaged with art. This past spring, we hosted an interdisciplinary research in the arts symposium. It was kind of the first of its kind on campus. And we found that there are people engaged in art all over Lehigh's colleges. This is an image of Jim Gilchrist, who is a chemical engineer who studies the qualities of paint in paintings. And he gave a fascinating lecture of how paint functions in a Van Gogh painting. And so you can watch those recordings on our website. Other priorities right now are really to take care of this great collection. I mentioned we have outdoor sculpture, which does take quite a few resources because of the ongoing natural elements that affect it. So bronzing, applying wax to these bronze sculptures like this piece by Henry Moore, or even completely repainting pieces. This is a work by Sean Cassidy called Organ Car, and we've now restored it to its golden exterior. Another work that's on Goodman campus, this sculpture by John Hawk titled Torso, has now been repainted to its brilliant red and blue. And this last example, also by the artist John Hawk, that sometimes surprises people because the change is so dramatic. But through the repainting, we also went back into our artist files to see what was the original color that the artist intended, the original Pantone color. And so this is actually the color that the artist intended. And so it is a real standout on Goodman campus. I can't tell you how many phone calls I get from people who are really amazed by this beautiful pink that the artist intended. We're really fortunate through the generosity of donors that we have now created an endowment to support the preservation of the outdoor sculpture collection. And so during this centennial year, we're hoping to reach our goal of $1 million for that endowment. Um, all of you know how beautiful Lehigh's campus is. It's often mentioned in the top lists. We are particularly proud that in Condé Nast Traveler, most recently, the art collection and the outdoor sculpture collection were noted in the description of Lehigh's beautiful campus. And we continue to build the collection. We're now at over 20,000 works, which we've been building over the past few years since 2018. But we're also building attendance. We're now regularly at or above 8,000 people coming to the art galleries. So we're bursting at the seams. So what's next? So before we opened it up for discussion, I thought I would just say a few words about what we're doing right now. Going back to our mission, we decided to prioritize well-being as a central part of our work. And you might know that this topic of well-being is really one that has just exploded by leaps and bounds in museums, in the art world, including the New York Times bestseller that you see on the right, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. And with good reason. I mean, research tells us that experiences with art reduce our stress. Even walking into a museum for 15 minutes can lower our cortisol levels. There are cognitive and emotional benefits to spending time with art. There is social connection when we meet people, family and friends at a museum. And of course, when we see works of art that maybe reflect who we are and our culture, it can boost identity and belonging. So these are all things that we are engaged with right now at the art galleries, particularly in this moment where we are all tethered to our computers, even right now. Even though there are great benefits to technology, our students are often telling us that they also want hands-on experiences with materials and process and the things that artists can teach us. And so we want those things to also still be a part of the experience at Lehigh. And you see that like in this recent article from the New York Times, where museums and all of the uniquely human things that they offer, I think are going to continue to be a big part of this conversation with new technologies. We are uniquely positioned to be a part of that conversation. LUAG is accessible, integrated, and inclusive. And so we're really excited for everyone to be making use of this great resource at the university. Um, and we're really proud to say we're making great strides. People who participate in our programs say that they agree or strongly agree that these experiences help their well-being, their cultural understanding, or help them see the value of other perspectives. So, a big birthday that we're celebrating this year, 100 years of the art galleries at Lehigh. And we thought, what can we do to celebrate such a big birthday? Well, we decided to turn our attention outward to our local community. In the Lehigh Valley, there are so many creatives. And so we decided to host an open call exhibition titled Here and Now, 100 Years of LUAG, 100 Local Artists. And I'll even say all of the graphics designed by Lehigh students. So we're really excited about that. We had over 800 submissions. And so we hung an exhibition that is a salon style exhibition on view through the whole year and we're celebrating this big birthday. So just about 6 weeks ago, we thought, let's hold a big birthday party. So on September 19th, we really pulled out all the stops and invited everyone to come celebrate the beginning of this year. And we had almost 1,200 people come. Students, faculty, staff, community members, neighbors, everyone, people near and far. It was shoulder to shoulder. And so we were just thrilled that there was so much enthusiasm for the art galleries and celebrating this big birthday. In fact, even Representative Steve Samuelson on the left from the Pennsylvania House and Laura Collins from the mayor's office both gave proclamations in honor of the art galleries, as well as President Joe Helbley there in the middle right. No, the gold jacket and green and white shoes are not part of my regular attire, but they were on point for the mood of the evening, I'll say. Finally, I'll mention that we have other projects in the works this year. We're publishing our very first guidebook to the collection with Hermer Verlag, based in Munich, and that will be distributed through the University of Chicago Press. And so it is actually already available for pre-order on the University of Chicago Press website, and it will feature 100 highlights of the collection written about by students, faculty, and community members. So, um, we would love to hear what would you like to see happen in the next 100 years at LUAG? And I'd be delighted to take any questions that you have. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. I don't know, probably those of you on the call that know me can probably tell how energized I am by this. I think this is incredibly exciting and very interesting. So I'm going to start you off with an easy one while you catch your breath. George Stephanopoulos, how did he get connected to Lehigh? We got a couple of
Um,
those. We're curious to
uh,
know
yeah.
how we got him engaged.
A lot of people ask that. He is not an alum.
Mm-mm.
He actually was someone who was engaged just before I started. He was looking to place his art collection in a university collection that would really make use of these photographs. And in fact, this is a larger trend that we're seeing. Most museums really build their collections through gifts. It's usually about 3/4 of any given museum. Their collection is made up by gifts. And so he had reached out to us via his art advisor. And so was really excited that Lehigh students could make use of these photographs. And so also our partnership with the political science department and journalism and communication. And we ended up mounting an exhibition of these photographs back in 2020 during the US presidential election year. So that's how he became engaged with us.
Fantastic. We
Mhm.
had a couple questions just to kind of follow up on that, and you did touch on this about the students helping you select some of the things, but just some questions around, overall acquisition, how you approach that, how you decide what you're doing, and then also I believe someone asked about, excuse me if I get deacquisition, if that's the
Oh,
correct way to say that,
yes.
if you will. Yes.
Yes. So in terms of acquisitions, I mean, we primarily bring things into the collection through the generosity of alumni and donors. We have a modest endowment for making purchases, so that student-led acquisition program that happens every 2 years, we draw from that endowment for the purchases. Of course, we're always looking to expand that endowment if anyone is interested. But that is typically how we acquire works. Sometimes through transfer from another institution that maybe has a similar artwork, and they really would like to place an artwork with us. We have not done much deaccessioning during my time, and for those who may not know, it might surprise you that sometimes museums let go of works of art, but that's naturally a part of a museum process. Otherwise, we might just be an accumulation of things. But that can happen for a number of reasons. Works of art that we can no longer care for or that need specialized attention, or maybe in the case of photographs, we might have a duplicate photograph. That is something we'll probably look at in the coming years, but in the last 7 years that I've been at Lehigh, we haven't been engaged in deaccessioning.
Great. That's perfect. My colleague Chris Hellstrom had an interesting question. Your cognitive science PhD, I'll add on to it, Chris, if that's okay. What drew you to do that for your doctorate, and how do you bring that to this work of yours?
Sure. Well, I'm really a believer in interdisciplinary study and education, and I didn't really go into my education thinking of it in those terms, but I began my study in art and languages, and then started working in museums and ended up going to school for that. But while I was working at the Metropolitan Museum, there was an enormous surge of interest in empirical research that drew on the social sciences, including cognitive science, about how do we know how people benefit from engaging with objects and museums and works of art. And so I was fortunate that the Metropolitan has a very long-standing partnership with Columbia University. So they supported me through my studies, and I ended up studying with a great advisor, Deanna Kuhn, who studies scientific reasoning and argumentation skills. And I did a project related to essentially how our beliefs about knowledge and where knowledge comes from affects the way that we make judgments about works of art. So that's how I landed there.
So interesting.
But always try to emphasize to my students that there are many paths that you can take, and those paths are often going to draw on many different disciplines.
Yeah, that's great. And I also just kind of think it shows that sort of real world impact that we have, right? That, we invent, but there is some real tangible benefits to spending time in space like this. So
Exactly.
Valerie had asked about the faculty room at Alumni Memorial, if it still
Hmm.
looks like that. I don't believe we have a faculty room. Please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that's there at all anymore. So no, I
Yeah.
don't. But I will say, having spent time in that space, I mean, I don't know if you would share a little bit about sort of your work to get more art across campus. I feel like more and more wherever I am, I see really great exhibitions from LUAG across campus. So if you would just touch on that briefly, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. In terms of the faculty room, I don't believe we have one like that, or not in Alumni
No.
Memorial. I think it's been repurposed since that photograph. But in terms of art on campus, we do want everyone to have this direct encounter where you might go around the corner and be confronted, but in the best way possible, with something unfamiliar that maybe causes you to ask new questions or to learn more about a different artist. Many of the works of art that we have across campus are accompanied by labels written by students or short videos. In the case of the outdoor sculpture collection, you can go on Lehigh's interactive Google map and link to those videos. It is something that is quite resource intensive. We actually have a
Mhm.
dedicated staff member who every Monday goes across campus and checks on these works of art. And so it is a big investment, but it's one that we really believe in terms of giving everyone access to the collection.
That's great. Um, I'd be interested in that. I'm just kidding, but that sounds like a great job, actually, that she gets to go around across campus every
Mhm.
Monday and look at those.
Mhm.
So we had a question about our great Picasso works and when or how we are able to view those, and also Ricardo Vieira's work, especially the trio of palm trees, and when those might be back on view.
Oh, yes. So with the Picasso, the five works that we have, we rotate. So do come see us anytime. You're likely to see something on view, although I don't believe. We have one on view, although I might be wrong. We might have one of his prints on view in our printmaking show at the moment. Um, and in terms of Ricardo's work, we actually do have one of his abstract paintings on view, not one that features his kind of signature palm trees, but a completely abstract work in our lower galleries. So I would invite everyone to come see that work, and it's a nice way, really, to keep Ricardo present at the art galleries.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And so Reggie Jennings, who I work with closely as well, had, which I can send, directly, had asked about um, diversity in the perspectives and the students involved in this space, and making sure that that is there. And then he did follow up to comment as your presentation went on that became more and more apparent. So just curious to hear, William, how you're working in that space, making sure there's representation and efforts that, are around that.
Yeah, really on all fronts. I mean, we believe this is the daily work that we all have to do. We're really fortunate, though, that Lehigh is so well positioned in its art collection because, as I mentioned briefly earlier, Lehigh was really a pioneer in collecting art, not only of different media. But also, I'll mention that we're very strong in works by women artists. We're very strong in works by what's known as outsider artists or non-traditionally trained artists. Because of Ricardo's passion, we're very strong in Latin American and Caribbean art. And so we believe that experiences with art are really rich places for people to hear a very different point of view or perspective, and hopefully to understand where someone else is coming from. And so the kinds of programming and exhibitions that we do are very much engaged in that. Often spearheaded by our student staff, which really is drawn from all over the university, from engineering and finance, from education, from the College of Health. And so they are typically the leaders of many of those conversations. And so, always much more work to be done on that front, but it is something that's a core value at the art galleries.
Absolutely. Quick side note on my own, I was in Roush Business Center a few weeks ago for the Financial Services Forum, and you have a great display in there. And in between breakout sessions, when I was helping, move people from one place to the next, I took some time to sort of walk down the hallway there. And it did feel, like there was a lot of really great representation there, like you said, especially Latin America. So I see the great work that's happening there. One specific question. Do you know what was the very first acquisition in Lehigh's collection?
It's interesting. I mean, I believe it's a little hazy, to be honest. We're really fortunate that much of the information I presented, we were fortunate to get through the research of a scholar who we contracted with last year, Kedra Daniels Navaroli. She's the McKnight Doctoral Fellow at the University of Central Florida. Um, Really, we think probably a portrait. Some of the portraits of early leadership are the first works to come into the collection. We
Mm,
think also a photograph of Asa Packer was one that was an early acquisition. But this is also something where some of the acquisition records around those early days are not as clear as we would like.
great. That's perfect. All right, one more, and then we'll release you with all of our great thanks and appreciation for this. But for the sculpture conservation, so of course some of those artists are still alive. I know you went back and looked at what they had originally intended on. How do you approach sculpture conservation? And you work with specific companies that come in and are expert in it, but just a little more about how you approach that work.
Yeah. I mean, every situation is different. Some sculptures don't require a lot of conservation. They need a good washing and they need to be observed very closely. Others sometimes need quite extensive conservation, like re-welding of joints. We have a lot of pieces made from Corten steel. We do work with outside consultants, although we're trying to build our internal capacity. We just sent one of our preparators down to Philadelphia to do some training so that now we can do a lot of the waxing of the bronze sculptures on our own without having to recruit outside help. So part of that endowment is to really build our capacity to do that.
That is fantastic.
Mhm.
All right, I think we got through the majority of the conversations in the chat. We did have some great suggestions and comments, so we'll be sure to share this with Dr. Crow afterwards as well for anyone that added one of those to the chats. But just thank you so very much. I think this is incredibly interesting. Congratulations. Also, I'm going to put you on the spot and remind everyone that you did receive the Getty Scholar Award this year as well, and so that's a big deal for you, and that we're celebrating this big milestone for LUAG. So we appreciate all of you coming to listen in today. Please feel free to reach out to questions. We'll send a follow-up. It was in the deck, but with Dr. Crow's information. But yes, thank you so very much and congratulations on everything.
It was a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us today.